from belief to knowing, the value of finding your own path. And this subject was requested from our friend in South Africa, Lasagna, and thought she would like me to talk about this. And I was actually thinking about talking about it before she asked, so that's an interesting coincidence. So I just kind of want to lay a foundation for this subject. This is something I wrote in the book I'm working on this week. Our individual consciousness, you and me, everyone, is a focused awareness, a collection of ideas, thoughts, and feelings generated by a matrix of underlying beliefs. Think of the soul as a supercomputer, and individual consciousness as the software that facilitates the world's or the soul's interaction with the world. Our current software may limit the computer's full potential. What we think of as spiritual growth, then, is not a soul issue, but a consciousness issue, a software upgrade, so to speak. Spiritual maturity isn't about increasing the soul's inherent power. It's about bringing the consciousness into alignment with the true nature of the soul, installing the software that unleashes the full power of the computer. So does everyone here own a computer? I know you own one, but you don't like it. So are we familiar pretty much with software, hardware, those ideas? You can have a supercomputer with very outdated software, and it will not tap the power of that computer. And I've had one of those. I've had many of those, actually. I don't know how many computers I've had, but I've had a bunch. But the time comes when the software just no longer keeps up, with what we usually do is get the whole thing. But we just imagine, let's just use our imagination here. Think of your soul, the true essence of what you are, as a supercomputer. You can't upgrade it. It's as good as it's ever going to get, and that's far beyond anything we can imagine. But our consciousness, our belief system, is like the software that can easily become outdated. And it does not then allow the full potential of that computer to operate. So when we talk about spiritual growth, we're talking about a software upgrade. We're not talking about evolving the soul. The supercomputer is already done. It's there waiting for the proper programming that will unleash whatever power is there. So if you can kind of put that in perspective, our belief system is the software. What we believe is the software. And the consciousness evolution we're talking about is moving from what we believe to knowing, to coming to know. And when we speak of the subject of God, and we talk about God within, we're talking about the soul that is fully connected to God. There's no place really where God leaves off and the soul begins. The supercomputer of God is the supercomputer of the soul, and I know that might be a hard one to grasp too, but it's not a computer problem that we have. It's a belief software problem. And there's always something we can do about that. And so we want to move to upgrade our software, to upgrade our consciousness. We want to move from belief to knowing. And how do we do that? Spiritually speaking, that's the big question. How do we move from belief to knowing? We all start out with belief. We are all trained to believe something. But let's use another illustration here I've used before, and I think it's a good one. Imagine a bowl of water on the table. Your friend tells you the water is ice cold, and you believe it. Then you decide to check for yourself. You put your hand in the water and discover it's very warm. With this simple illustration, you've transitioned from belief to knowing. So what's the difference between belief and knowing? Somebody tells you the water is cold and you believe them. You trust this person, so you believe them. You're 5 years old, you go to Sunday school, the teacher tells you Jesus loves you because the Bible says Jesus loves you, and you believe them because that's the authority. And I think she's probably correct, but she tells you a lot of other things too that you might want to check out later on, and you probably have. But you see the difference in this illustration between belief and knowing. Somebody tells you something and you believe them, but what you believe about that bowl of water is not true. And of course that doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter if the water is warm or cold or whatever. It's just an illustration. But you see the difference is you put your hand in it, you have an experience. You have a direct experience, a direct knowing. So that's the difference between the mystic and the cleric, the mystic and the clergyman, the theologian. The theologian bases ideas on belief, the belief system. They build a belief system. The mystic steps outside of that because they put their hand in the bowl and they know that the nature of God is something quite different from what they were taught. And many mystics have stayed within the church framework, but many were condemned by it, and we'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. But the beliefs of the forefathers, when we read the statement of faith of any religious organization, we're reading a list of beliefs that have been worked out by the forefathers. When you get into a religious argument with somebody, what you're doing probably is arguing at a software level, at a belief level. They are telling you what beliefs are correct and what beliefs are not. And you're saying, I either agree with that or I don't, but it's an argument that takes place at the software level. Has nothing to do with the computer. Has nothing to do with what is the computer, what can it do. Has nothing to do with a direct revelation or direct experience with God, which we get by going within in times of quiet. Must be very patient to do that. But that's what most religion is. It's the beliefs of our forefathers. And we accept that as valid because it's tradition and they're so old. They go back a long ways. And they are people that wear funny hats and robes and, carry interesting artifacts around that give them the appearance of authority. They should know what they're talking about because they are clad this way and they're in this position and they live in a cathedral and they're tied to a very big organization, a very wealthy organization, so they must know what they're talking about. It was kind of interesting. I read an article this week about the Pope that passed away. I'm sure you all heard about that. But one of the reporters, a reporter that knew him some years back, they were friends actually, and the reporter was asking about hell, and he claimed that the Pope said there is no hell, that the soul just evaporates if it's not in good shape. I've never heard that. And apparently that article was about to be released and the church caught it and they corrected it. There is absolutely a hell and there's absolute sin, and don't even think about this. And I don't, nobody knows for sure if the Pope said that, but instead of going to hell, you just evaporate. That'd probably be a better alternative, if I were asked to choose the two. But what is that? It's a belief. It's a belief up against other beliefs. The church comes back and says, no, that's not what we believe. We don't believe the soul evaporates. You're going to go to hell if you sin. That's the belief. Is there any proof of that? Do we have proof that that's true? And the answer to that is no, we don't. We have people that have what they claim to be hellacious near-death experiences, but that's not necessarily proof. None of it's proof. When we put our hand in the water, we'll know. We'll know. But I have pretty firm belief that there is no hell and that souls don't evaporate. I would go against the Pope in that case, and not that it matters, but so I wonder what happened to his soul. Is he evaporated, or is he having a great time? That would be interesting to know. And I doubt we'll get a letter from him, but you never know. So from I believe to I know, the Apostles' Creed, for example, as I talked about last week, I believe, it starts with I believe, and it lists a series of statements the believer is expected to accept as true. What happens when a person decides to question these beliefs and actually put their hand in the water? This is what the mystic does. They will, in that instant, begin rewriting their own statement, shifting from I believe to I know. So if you read the Apostles' Creed, and I've done this, I've gone through and copied and pasted into a file and then commented on each line just for my own exercise, and I don't agree with any of it. There's nothing in that creed that I believe, because I have had an experience of knowing. I put my hand in the water one day, and I discovered the quality of God is very different from what most of us think. It is a love, it is energy, it is pure being, like we sang about this morning. It's not an old man in the sky. It is an energy that is beyond anything that we can imagine, beyond anything we can work toward, because we don't know what it is until we experience it. So you go from belief to knowing. And I will say, in my own case, I've just put my toe in the water, basically, not dove in like a lot of the mystics have. But the experience I had, I know is real, and there's nothing that would ever change my mind to convince me otherwise. And then when other people talk about a similar experience, I recognize what they're talking about. I know what they're saying. So I go through that whole thing of I believe, and I can't answer in the affirmative to much of any of it. I actually stop with the first line, I believe in God. But I would go further than that, say I know from experience that God is real. So I'm not adopting a belief. I did that in the early part of my life. All of us do that. We step into a belief system, and we're it's given to us as the authority. And so we believe it, or we confess or confirm that we believe it, whether we actually believe it or not. And I thought about that a lot. Did I really believe that stuff that I was hearing? I don't remember if I did or not. I don't remember laying awake at night worried about going to hell, though I did undergo the baptism and all that, just in case. But I've never really had a major wreck in my life, but I still buy insurance, That's kind of the same thing. So Evelyn Underhill, in her classic work, Mysticism, which in some ways I recommend, in some ways I don't, because it's a very deep, highly involved work, but it's got a lot of really good stuff in it, because she reports on the experiences of mystics, some we've heard and some we have not. But she says, she highlights the mystic's defining characteristic as experiencing a conscious relation with the Absolute. The mystic does not merely believe in God, they put their hand in the water. They know God is a living presence. So the whole thing of religion is, I think that's why people in record numbers are abandoning formal religion, because it's a belief system. And with science and everything as it is, with the internet, with our ability to sit in on seminars from people all over the world that are talking about things that wonderful things. I've been spending my time lately listening to some wonderful biblical scholars. And it's just still amazing to me that we can go hear these people. You know, you would have to go to a university otherwise if you didn't have this. You'd have to go to the one that they're at or read one of their books. But you can go watch these podcasts, you know, interviews, one-on-one interviews with world-famous scholars, scientists, astrologers, whatever. I mean, astronomers, people of every discipline. So we can expose ourselves to this, and we can listen to people who say, I don't think Jesus was even a real person. And there's some very well-educated people that are saying that, as I said last week, and they're making careers out of it. I think they're wrong, but it's still worth listening to people like this. It's worth listening to people from all sides and hear their story, hear why they think what they're saying is true. And that we have access to that is a marvelous thing. But we also have to be, you know, keep our mind open, but, you know, not so open that our brain falls out, you know, as the saying goes. But I find it very enriching to listen to all sides. I think I've heard enough fundamental Christianity because it's the same story, it's the same stuff. And I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe what they're saying. I don't believe anything about it. I think Jesus was a person. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I'm extremely interested in what that man had to say. And there's a way to get to it. And we have to go through that belief system because, you know, the four Gospels are a belief system. There are four different belief systems that are based basically on the same idea. Jesus is the Son of God. He, you know, basically has died for our sins and all that. And there's variations of that. But I consider myself a follower of Jesus, and the closer I get to what I think he taught, the more compatible I feel. I think he was a human being that was having an experience very much like ours, the one that we have. I was reading Brother Lawrence. Are you familiar with him? He was a monk. He was a Frenchman. I'm trying to think of the period, 1400s or something that he lived. But he was so poor when he was growing up that he joined the army just to eat and to, you know, have a little bit of an income. But he was on a battlefield one day and saw a tree that had not leafed out yet. It was winter. It was cold. And something about that tree, he said in his thinking, he saw that pretty soon that tree would start leafing out, that life was there and it would start expressing itself. And that was the beginning of he was about 16 years old, out there on a battlefield, and he had a mystical awakening. He had an awakening. He became a monk later, but he was a klutz. He broke everything that he touched, and he made people angry, and he just because he was that way. But he was revered because he had such an insight, very little education. I guess he was able to write because he wrote letters, and they were later compiled and put into this book, Practicing the Presence of God. But totally uneducated. But there were people that would record what he said. You know, they would have interviews, sort of discussions, and somebody would write down what he said. And then later on that was compiled along with his letters into that little book. But the point I'm making here is when you get into that guy's book, into his life, he feels like a real person. You can feel it. He talks about practicing the presence of God while I'm in the kitchen washing dishes or while I'm going to town to buy wine for the monastery. And I guess he did that quite a bit. Or, you know, working in the garden. And you just get a feel for this guy. He's a person. He's a real person. And he's doing things like we do, you know, things that we're familiar with. When you read the Gospels, you read the accounts of the life of Jesus, it's like getting in his personality a cardboard cutout. You know, we're so far removed from the man, from that person. We're getting filtered through, Brother Lawrence was, his first writings were in French, the language he spoke. The earliest writings we have that people wrote around Jesus were Greek. Jesus spoke Aramaic, so there's a distance between the language. But the earliest writings we have, you know, are a couple hundred years. Well, Mark came out in roughly 70, but as I said last week, we don't have any copies of that until about the mid-2nd century. And then I think the fullest copy of Mark is 4th century. So we're so far removed from that man, we don't know who he was as a person. And of course, when we get into spiritual studies, we kind of downplay the personality. But it is the personality that brings that person alive to us as a person. Because we have a personality, we understand the personality of another. And what we want to understand beyond that is, what did that personality do different that set him apart? He put his hand in the bowl. He got a feel for that temperature of that water, and he spoke and wrote from that place. He had a conscious relation with the absolute. And the more you read about Brother Lawrence, the closer you get to that whole thing. And there's a lot about him online, so you can check that out. So in many cases, such people find themselves at odds with religious powers. Madame Guyon, the very popular 7th century French mystic and writer, was for 7 years imprisoned by the church for her experiential approach to God. Read her book, A Short and Easy Method of Prayer, and you'll think it rolled off a Unity Press. You can get that book for free. There's a group called the Gutenberg something or other. They make available books that are not copyrighted, and you can go on and download it if you have a Kindle or your tablet or whatever. But I would highly recommend this book because she is saying what we're saying. She was a person who put her hand in the bowl, and the church didn't like that. They didn't like it at all. She taught a thing called orison. We call it meditation. And it was banned by the church. If you go within yourself and you have a first-hand experience with God, you're going to get all messed up. And what they mean by that is you're not going to be a believer, you're going to be a knower. And they don't want knowers, they want people that believe and fall in line. She didn't do it. She got a great following in her day. She was not only imprisoned for 7 years, they tried to assassinate her through poisoning her. So it was like, meditating was dangerous back then. You just didn't want to talk about it if you were doing it. But that's the beauty of this whole, you put your hand in the bowl and say, I want to talk about that because it's different from what I'm being told. So I want to tell others there's another way. There's a different way to. The mystic always does this. And what we find is many mystics are not well educated. Charles Fillmore, called the American mystic, I think he had about a 4th grade education. If you read his books, you can't tell it. He was completely self-educated. Phineas Quimby, the grandfather of New Thought in America, had very little education. One person said, I know he was intelligent because he spelled head, H-E-D, consistently. So, but what's going on up here isn't what it's about. This is where the belief system is. It's in the head. And so we memorize, this list of beliefs, and we go to a church and we read every week what we believe. And that's not what we know. We're just saying, yes, I do believe this. I'm part of this group. I'm part of this community. So I want to confess that I do believe what they say. Meister Eckhart, another one with a very low education. 13th century German mystic whose writings remain widely quoted by today's New Thought community, was condemned as a heretic by the church, his writings banned. He and others like him dared to share not their beliefs, but their direct knowledge of the nature of God. You're familiar with Meister Eckhart. I don't know if, I've got one of his books. His books are sermons, many of his sermons. And he caught the attention of the Inquisition, because he was talking about inner stuff. He was talking about the inner awakening. And so the Inquisition picked up on him and basically condemned his writings, and they didn't punish him because he died first. They didn't have a chance. But when he died, they condemned him as a heretic. And today, we look at him again, from outside of that belief system, he was brilliant. He was a brilliant individual. And where do individuals like that get this information? They don't get it out here someplace. They get it from within. And there were several other people around him that also became well known. But what they learned how to do was speak their mysticism in a language that fit the church's belief system. So they weren't on the radar. And they learned how to do this. But one writer said that mysticism was very big in the early years, but it began to shrink because of the hierarchy of the church and the belief system that was put in. I think if you go back to Jesus, you find that the founder of this whole movement was a mystic. But the church of his day didn't get it any more than the church of Madame Guyon's day or Meister Eckhart's day. They didn't get it either. And so they condemned. And what they did with Jesus is the Jewish leaders actually, when you read the Gospels, the story we get is the Jewish leaders were the ones that did the main condemning. They brought him before Pilate. Pilate said, there's nothing, I don't see any sin in this guy, no crime. But they wanted him gone, probably for the same reason that the Catholic Church wanted Madame Guyon gone. He was put his hand in the bowl. He was coming from a different place. We're told that Jesus taught them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. He had the nerve to put his hand in the bowl of water. And I think that's what the difference was. And I think that's what we will miss. That's what I think many Bible scholars miss. They're head people. They're intellectuals. They're academics. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate the discipline of that. But if they are not mystics, if they have never put their hand in the bowl, then they're going to call Jesus something else. They're going to call him an apocalyptic prophet or one who was, love your neighbor as yourself, a social justice warrior. I don't think he was any of that. He was saying that the kingdom of God that you are looking for is already here. And there's a way for you to tap into it. There's a way for you to put your hand in that bowl of water and learn for yourself what is true. And people didn't, the people in charge did not want that kind of a message out there because it threatened their business. And that's really the bottom line, is it threatens the whole structure of the belief system, everything we're teaching. I heard one scholar talking about somebody was coming up with something that challenged a belief they'd taught in their university for years, and the instructor said, I hope it's not true because I've been teaching it all this time and I don't want to change. That's how they say science evolves one funeral at a time. It's that old thought about you get rid of the people that come up with a theory and then somebody else comes up with another one. But the mystical thing, the spiritual, you may not like the word mystical, but the spiritual approach is all about direct experience. That's what we are after. We want to move from belief to knowing. And that is a very important object of our spiritual development. Because most of us were introduced to spiritual matters through established belief systems, we may feel a little uncomfortable putting our own hand in the bowl. we may feel even more uncomfortable saying what we've discovered. But if our spiritual journey is to mean anything, then we must be willing to transition from belief to knowing. In working on this book that I'm working on, I found myself feeling quite uncomfortable writing some things I've been writing. Like this whole resurrection thing, do I believe that? That's a belief system. And to actually write, I don't think so. It was hard. It's hard to do. And it goes against everything traditional Christianity teaches. But why should I keep it quiet if I don't believe it? Why should I pretend like I do believe it when I don't? I think that if people saw him, it was probably through a vision like Paul. But did he physically resurrect? I've never known anybody to do that. Sometimes I feel like I do it because I can hardly get out of bed in the morning. But that's a whole different thing. But so we look at all those things. Do I believe this? Do I accept it because somebody told me I should? Or do I accept it because I know it's true? Okay? I'm not answering any questions. I hope I'm raising some. So that's what we're all about, transitioning from belief to knowing. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.